Hello and welcome to another episode of the PropSwap podcast. We are your hosts, Ian Epstein
and Luke Pergande.
And we are also the founders of PropSwap, the first marketplace to buy and sell sports bets. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We've got another great episode for you. We'll do a quick NFL recap. We will go over a crazy Saturday in college football, get to our favorite stake or swap picks. But first, Luke, how was your Thanksgiving? It's good to see you.
Good to see you. It was good. We spent the day in southern Wisconsin. My parents have a lake house on a lake called Lake Delavan. It is about 15 minutes west of Lake Geneva. Probably the more popular lake is Geneva. Delavan is increasingly becoming popular because everyone in Chicago is moving out of the city and into southern Wisconsin. But they were fortunate to get in a little bit early before that rush into southern Wisconsin. They bought that house in 2016. So much more space up there than our house in Des Plaines, suburb of Chicago. So good to see the grandparents, good to see the family, and eat some good food. I love Thanksgiving side dishes. Turkey can be hit or miss, but big sides guy.
Yeah, I totally agree. The sides are the main course. For the first Thanksgiving ever, we had the mac and cheese included with the breadcrumbs on top. So that was a great addition. I was in Oakland, California, with my sister and her family for Thanksgiving. Got to watch the England USA soccer match on Friday morning. Early start time for the West Coast, but when you've got a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old niece, there is no such thing as too early. Also, trying to keep two 7-year-old and a 3-year-old sitting still for an hour and a half plus soccer match, not the easiest thing in the world, but we made it happen. It was, even though it was 0-0, I thought it was still a great match. It set a record for viewership for a U.S. men's national team match with a little over 15 million viewers. I know, even though it was 0-0, were you watching it?
Had it on Friday morning, or Friday afternoon, I should say. Try to get a workout in Thursday. I think I ate enough food for the entire company at PropSwap. So, but had it on. The 0-0 endings. Now, I'm playing Monday morning quarterback here by saying I don't like watching soccer because the game finished 0-0. Like, I didn't, of course, know that when I was allocating my Friday afternoon, so that's not completely fair. But yeah, I just wish they would figure out a way to increase scoring. And I know that's easier said than done. Obviously, Rob Manfred of baseball, the commissioner of MLB, has made like a ton of steps to increase scoring going into next season. So I realize that's much more difficult to do when you're on a world stage and it's happening every 4 years. But I get it. I guess the coolest part of the World Cup to me is, like, I was fortunate to be in Mexico a week and a half ago for my birthday and another guy's wedding. Just had to be in the same weekend. But my takeaway was, like, everyone is down to watch this and everyone is super excited that this tournament is happening, whether that's Mexico, Canada, USA, England, Wales. Had a long discussion of what Wales is at dinner last Wednesday night. Kind of got a UK history / geography lesson. But my point is, like, this is a global event as opposed to, like, Phillies, Astros. Like, I don't think anyone gives a crap about that game besides Americans. So it's very cool to have the globe watching these sporting events and competing against all these other countries. That part's awesome.
Yeah, despite the fact that it's called a World Series, no one outside the U.S. Actually cares about that.
Yeah.
I think I've probably watched way more soccer in my life than you have. My sister played soccer, so I watched a lot of her games. I played some soccer growing up and just have watched it more. And so you learn to appreciate the things on the field that aren't the scoring, the passes, the cuts. These are some of the best athletes in the world, still playing the game. And so, if you watch, France had a great match where they scored a bunch of goals. Spain, the Brazil match, there was a crazy bicycle kick. So, like, in the vacuum, the England USA match was 0-0. I still think it was very exciting to watch. I love the fact that you know exactly how long these things are going to take. There's no ridiculous commercial breaks. Nothing makes me more mad than in baseball, like the pickoff plays and the calls to the bullpen. So I think it's extremely exciting to watch, and I love to see that the game is growing. And you can watch this, and then if you start watching some of the other, the Premier League or the Champions League, and you see that these guys who play with each other all the time, it's even better to watch that. But the whole represent your country part, I think that's super cool, and everyone gets to like be a huge homer for their country for a couple of weeks. So. Hopefully, USA, as we record this, they need to win against Iran on Tuesday. Hopefully, that they have done that and will advance to the knockout round. But speaking of other things that happened this weekend, it was an extremely exciting day in college football, highlighted by the Michigan-Ohio State game. I will just go on the record right now and say that I'm a huge Michigan fan. Grew up watching Michigan. My whole family went to Michigan. I hate Ohio State, so watching Michigan run it up in Columbus against Ohio State as a 8.5-point underdog was extremely satisfying to watch. And so some PropSwap customers took advantage of this as well. Prior to the game, during the game, after the game, sold a bunch of Michigan tickets because that was, again, not an expected result. And so, for example, before the game, we had a Michigan championship ticket with a collect amount of about $1,700 sold for $111. So that was odds of 14-1 for the buyer. We'll get to what Michigan currently is, and we'll talk more about that in Stake or Swap. But great odds of 14-1, and that was the best in the country before the game. And then obviously that's gone up tremendously since the game. And then after the game, a $5,000 collect 2-leg parlay with the Cowboys to win the NFC and Michigan to win the championship. That sold for $300, odds of 16-1 for the buyer. Again, that was after the game, so the result was known. But we've got a crazy situation here where we've got about 6 teams on the bubble, 6 teams with a potential spot. Some may only say 5, but you would think that after losing, like Ohio State did, you would think that team would be pretty much eliminated. However, according to Caesar Sports, after the Ohio State-Michigan game, the team that has received the most amount of money to win the national title is Ohio State. Buckeyes had odds as high as 50-1 following the loss, and now they're down to 14-1. And a Colorado bettor, this was not me, put $4,000 on Ohio State at 40-1. So that's a potential win of $160,000. So we'll get more to these teams in Stake or Swap. But what were your thoughts on the college football Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like Michigan did that without their star running back Blake Corum. Right?
That's correct.
And
he Corum got hurt against Illinois. He was questionable all week whether he was going to play. He suited up. He played about a series or two, and then definitely was still hurt, re-aggravated his injury, and then he was out the rest of the game.
Yeah, and I guarantee some wise guy or some I put professional sports bettor in quotes, or some, let's say a tout to be specific, was like, oh, Blake Corum, I have inside information on Blake Corum. He's not going to go fade Michigan, right? Like, how often do we hear these calls just based on injury information? They're like, I'm a sharp, quote unquote, I have inside info, fade him.
Yeah, well, and that's why day of the game, the spread ticked up from Ohio State -8 to Ohio State -9, because the news was coming out that Corum was not going to play, or even if he did play, he was still hurt. College football does not share the same rules as NFL in terms of having to report injuries, although we'll get to an NFL story where there was some incorrect information. But yeah, no, totally. The wise guys knew that Corum was not going to be 100% playing, and that's why the money was coming in on Ohio State day of the game.
Yeah. So, I'm just always super leery of making picks just based on injury information. I feel like so many times it doesn't happen that way. Just because Michigan's rushing attack doesn't have their star running back, fade them. That's not always the case. And it's it's a lot more difficult to handicap a football game than just saying, oh, well, if your star player is hurt, you're automatically going to lose. Like a lot of times in big games, it doesn't work out like that. So
yeah. I mean, it's pretty well documented that quarterbacks are far and away the biggest line movers. But Corum was in the Heisman conversation. So I mean, and that was a tale of two halves, because Michigan kind of struggled early on, and it kind of looked like they were going to be exchanging field goals for touchdowns. And then, I mean, just something clicked, and Michigan, even without Corum, just started running all over Ohio State.
Yeah, in terms of like running the game, I agree. But to me, like the biggest difference was J.J. McCarthy. He had wide open receivers. Like Gus Johnson he made a quote after McCarthy hit this, literally no one within 12 yards of this receiver, and Gus Johnson goes, "Oh, McCarthy can't throw a deep ball. Watch this." Like in no universe was that a good throw. Like the receiver was literally couldn't have been more open. So my takeaway was like, good job to the Michigan OC, because you confused the hell out of the Ohio State defense. Like they were so confused, and now I imagine they were trying to stop the run, so they were daring McCarthy to throw a pass, but like 12 yards is 12 yards. Like you can't. You're trying to win the national championship. You can't have a guy 12 yards open and shrieking down the seam of the football field. So McCarthy played good, and he hit those guys. You better hit those guys. But, I was most impressed by Michigan's OC by just getting these guys in space and confusing the Ohio State defense.
Yeah. No, they mentioned several times in the broadcast that it was against man-to-man coverage, and Ohio State just did not adjust. They came out, they were running man-to-man, and Michigan picked them apart, Ohio State got completely outcoached by Michigan. Yeah. I thought there were some questionable decisions by Ryan Day where he punted the ball in situations where they were losing, and it's 4th and 3 around midfield, and they run out the punt team. It's like in today's game, like you have a better chance of converting that, or getting a penalty or something. So once again, Harbaugh, I thought outcoached Day there.
Yeah.
So. The way it currently sits, we only have the AP poll as we sit here today. We don't have the college football committee's rankings just yet. It's Georgia number 1, Michigan number 2, TCU number 3. All three of those teams are undefeated. USC number 4, Ohio State 5, and Alabama 6. So the question to you is, if TCU or USC loses, are they out of the playoff, or does TCU obviously, I think we all agree that if USC loses against Utah in the Pac-12 championship, they are probably out of the playoff. But if TCU, which is currently undefeated, if they lose against Kansas State, do you think that they will get jumped by either Ohio State or Alabama?
If they get the doors blown off, if Kansas State rolls them, there might be the committee is going to do everything they can to get Bama back in this thing. I fully believe that the 12 people who make up the CFP committee want Bama in this thing. They have a ton of money, a ton of boosters. They'll travel to the game, as opposed to like TCU, which is such a small school. Like I have to imagine this will be one of the smallest schools in history. Not that the CFP has been around for that long, but to get to that playoff, it's like really small enrollment. So, Bama represents more money and more TV ads that they'll be able to sell, because if college sports is all about finance, it barely has to do with the kids. So if it's close, TCU automatically gets in. If it's a blowout, if Kansas State blows them out, there's a chance that Bama gets put in there. So, but if it's within a 10-point game, I'll say even if TCU loses, they still go.
I would agree with that, but because if TCU loses, I could see the committees. And first of all, I think Ohio State is the next in line, because they've got 1 loss versus Alabama's got 2 losses. Now, granted, Alabama's 2 losses were both on the road and very close, versus Ohio State getting blown out at home. But I just don't see how they could put a 2-loss Alabama over a 1-loss Ohio State. But I could, if comparing Ohio State and TCU loses, I could see the committee saying, Ohio State lost to the number 2 team in the country, Michigan, and TCU lost to, I don't know if they're unranked or whatever, but lost to a much inferior Kansas State team. So
yeah, they're ranked. They're ranked 14.
So I do think TCU really does need to win, and like I said, we'll get to more of that coming up in Stake or Swap, and then just the last thing on college football. The Heisman race seems pretty determined. Caleb Williams is minus 2,200. And yet again, we have another example where the favorite, with a couple weeks left to play, does not win it. I think Caleb Williams is deserving. I like to see a West Coast player get it, because I think too often there's a lot of East Coast bias, and the writers aren't up at 10, 11 p.m. Eastern watching some of these USC games. But just to recap, a couple weeks ago, CJ Stroud was about a plus 120 even money favorite to win the Heisman. Meanwhile, Caleb Williams was 12-1. He was as high as 12-1 on November 14th. If you go back even further, he was 14-1 on November 2nd. And now all of a sudden he's minus 2,200. So just another example of how if you stay focused on these Heisman races, these things start with like 3 weeks left to go in the season. That's when I feel like that's when you would want to make a bet. And you can find some great, because Caleb Williams was like 8-1 preseason, and then 12-1, like I said, on November 18th. So, 10 days ago, you could find some great value in the Heisman race.
Yeah, no, I mean, and you told everyone to sell their Hendon Hooker bets on PropSwap. So another guy who was basically even money 3 weeks ago. So, completely agree. We see this so frequently where a long shot Heisman candidate gets really, really close with 2 or 3 weeks left in the season, gets blown out, gets injured, loses a close game, and now his team's not undefeated. Like, there's just so many variables that can go wrong with 2 or 3 weeks left in the college football regular season, that selling your ticket on PropSwap at even money, like, my gosh, you're leaving so few dollars on the table by being able to flip it at even money with a month left in the season, just seems so much more prudent than holding on to it. And, as we talk about, very difficult to hedge that thing. If you had a Hooker ticket, you got to make a Caleb Williams bet. You got to make a CJ Stroud bet. Like, there's a bunch of other outcomes you can't, that you need to factor in, versus selling your Hooker ticket. You could have made 60x, 50x on your Hendon Hooker ticket by selling it on PropSwap before they lost. Yeah.
And, I say it all the time. And again, I think Caleb Williams is deserving, but these late season games carry so much more weight than the early season games. And when Ohio State had that performance, CJ Stroud came out as a minus 1,500 favorite after that Ohio State Michigan game. And it was pretty much his to lose, just because of a bad performance in the last week of the season. And we saw it again. Same thing happened last season with CJ Stroud and, blowing it on the last week of the season. So, and it's not just Heisman. It's pretty much any awards voting. The end of the season is weighed so much more heavily because of the recency.
Yep, recency bias, absolutely a valid, irrational behavior by voters.
Yeah, but yeah, just something to keep in mind that these voters are human, so it's what humans do, is take what happened most recently into account. And then lastly, just a quick recap of the NFL week. As I mentioned, you texted me on Sunday morning, because you had a tweet from, I think it was Ian Rappaport, saying that that Nathan Peterman, it was Schefter. It was Schefter that Nathan Peterman was going to start for the Bears. That was because the official Bears Twitter account said that Nathan Peterman was going to start 45 minutes before game time, and then Trevor Siemian ended up starting for the Bears. Both were not great options, but it kind of ticked off a lot of bookmakers and bettors, because if the official account is saying that person A is starting and then person B is starting, you would think that they would know who was actually the starting quarterback 45 minutes. So it's just tough if you're a bettor or you're a bookmaker and there's millions of dollars on the line here, and you can't even trust that as a source, the official Bears Twitter account. So yeah, what were your thoughts on that? I mean, if these leagues are going to start taking money from the gambling companies, I feel like they got to be more accurate about this.
Yeah, which they are. So I agree. I don't know. I need to study up on what the rules are between announcing. I mean, clearly the NFL didn't fine them. So the NFL Twitter account for a team is legally allowed by the NFL rules, legally allowed to tweet out quarterback A 45 minutes prior to kick and then start quarterback B. Like that clearly is legal. So like, to me, like that's a problem, and you need to have stricter position announcements if we're going to have this much money getting wagered on the outcome of a Chicago versus New York matchup. Like that's a big game. I realize that it's, the back up the field's going, but still it's a Chicago versus New York sporting event. Like there is a ton of dough getting wagered on that. So I feel like there just needs to be stricter position / starting announcements than there are today, because this is not sufficient.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's like, just don't tweet anything,
that's fine.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you're not going to owe it to us who's starting a quarterback, that's one thing. But if you're going to tell everyone who's starting and then they don't start, like that seems misleading. If you want to have no rules, I'm okay with that. But I guess we just need to be like clear with the gambling community, like what exactly are the rules for position announcements, especially a quarterback. You want to tell me the right guard isn't starting and a backup right guard's going? Okay, not a huge deal. But, quarterback is paramount.
Bookmakers reported that after it was announced that Peterman was starting, that they took multiple $100,000 plus bets on the Jets.
Sure.
Now, the Jets ended up covering, so no harm, no foul in this situation. But next time it could be something different.
Good. Yeah, I mean, Simeon came out in that first drive or second drive of the game. He almost punched it in. Like he looked strong to start the game. He finished poorly, but I mean, Peterman is a joke. Like he has like set records for ineptitude at quarterback. Like Simeon's not bad. It's Peyton Manning's backup. So he started out okay, but yeah, the Jets ended up polishing off the Bears, and now Darnell Mooney is done for the season. Yeah, the Bears are a train wreck. And to be honest, me as a Bears fan, I want them to lose. Like it needs a complete overhaul. I would like as high as a draft pick as humanly possible next year. I'd like them to spend $100 million on the offensive line. So, and they have I think they have the highest cap, the largest cap space in the league next year, if not top three.
Yeah, they will.
Yeah. So I'm a fan of them losing, but still, in terms of sports betting, I wish there was stricter rules.
Yeah. And then anything else catch your eye this week?
I mean, I'm super happy with the teams that are continuing to succeed. Vikings are a big dog. They're now down to
like 16 to 1.
They're still 17 to 1. Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And they would have been a 1 seed if Philly lost to Green Bay last night. But yeah, Vikings still look good. Gosh, I'd be a buyer at 17 to 1 and just flip it later on. They can beat the Eagles. I'm not saying they will beat the Eagles, but they can beat them if they push the ball downfield. If the Vikings can jump out to like a 17-7 or a 17-3 lead with the way that Justin Jefferson's playing and Adam Thielen, like I don't know that the Eagles are built to come back from that. If the Eagles control the game, they could beat anyone. If they continue to pound the football and run the ball as well as they can beat anyone. But if someone jumps out to a 17-3 lead like the Chiefs, the Bills, and the Vikings can on that team, I'm not worried as much about the Niners because they don't really play that game. But Bills, Vikings, Chiefs, like quick striking teams, you could upset the Eagles. But yeah, and of course, Eagles are 40 to 1. They're down to about 5 to 1. So great outcome for PropSwap. These teams were big underdogs at some point throughout the season. Cowboys, of course, when they lost Dak, were crazy long underdogs, like 50 to 1, 60 to 1. They're now down to 9 to 1. Dolphins preseason were 30 or 40 to 1. They're 15 to 1. So yeah, great outcome for PropSwap. A lot of dogs are in the hunt, and you still got the two powerhouses, Chiefs and Bills, looking strong too.
Yeah, pretty much everyone besides the Chiefs or Bills were double digits at some point this year. But yeah, just on the Vikings, I agree. I mean, they have not been getting the respect from the bookmakers. I think that was shown. One example was them being underdogs at home to the Cowboys and then getting blown out when everyone thought that they should be after beating the Bills on the road. And then if you look this week, they're only a 3-point favorite at home against the Jets, against Mike White and the Jets. So for whatever reason, the bookmakers are just not respecting the Vikings just yet. And honestly, Kirk Cousins could be lifting the Lombardi Trophy, and I still think people would be like, I don't know about this guy.
Yeah. I mean, he's certainly the weakest link, and Dalvin Cook needs to stay in the field. So Kirk is more reliable to stay in the field than Dalvin Cook is. But I mean, Justin Jefferson is the best receiver in the NFL. It's not even close, in my opinion.
Him and Tyreek.
Yeah. I guess sure. I lean Jefferson just because of the height thing, but Tyreek Hill can climb the ladder and jump out of the gym / field. So maybe I shouldn't give him the discount because of he's not as tall as Jefferson. But I mean, they're a good team. Like I said, like the way to beat the Eagles is jump out early and not let them pound the ball down your throat, which is what they've been doing to most of the teams this year. Like if you don't jump out too early and let Philly control the clock, like they're going to win the game. But if you can jump out early and strike quick, you got a shot. And I think the Vikings can do that with Jefferson.
Yep. It'll be an exciting home stretch. And then just last thing, NFL, Deshaun Watson returns this week for the Browns. Jacoby Brissett was only able to get them to a 4-7 record. I was looking at their odds earlier. They are a huge long shot to win the division, 30-1, the AFC North. But what are you expecting from Deshaun?
I mean, from a fantasy perspective, I've been stashing him since like week 5. So I think he'll be good. And Amari Cooper has looked good. Like he still can improve his drops, but he's a weapon for Deshaun. But yeah, odds across the board on Cleveland: 200-1 at MGM, 130-1 at DraftKings. So really ton of variance in their odds. To me, like I'd be buying a future on PropSwap or at a legal sports book so you can sell it on PropSwap, and then just have it up there during the game this weekend. Like say you can get 200-1 at MGM, post it at odds of 65-1 during the game because he's going to have some electric play. Deshaun Watson will, and everyone's going to go nuts. And just like see if you find a buyer for it. So that would be my strategy: is just grab long odds right now. Don't bet the house, like one or two units, and then just have it at odds of 60-1 throughout the Texans game this weekend, and see if you can find a buyer. But they'll beat that. I would imagine they beat them. The Browns beating.
They are currently 7-point favorites at Houston.
Yeah, I mean they should roll them. And then you have after that, you have the Bengals, tough game but possible. Ravens, Saints, Commanders, Steelers. So favorite it's at home against New Orleans. They'll be favored in that game. They'll be favored even though it's in DC, not by much. That might be a coin flip, the way the Commanders are playing recently. And then at Pittsburgh, I think there'll be a small favorite in that. So, Ravens trending in the wrong direction right now.
Browns currently 10-1 to make the playoffs at FanDuel. So it's a long shot, but I will be very interested to see what type of player returns to the field. Is it the MVP caliber, or is it a guy that looks like he hasn't played football in a couple of years?
Yeah, that's on him to stay in shape.
Yeah, and so without further ado, that brings us to this week's edition of Stake or Swap. First up, we will be talking about that team that wears maize and blue. The Michigan Wolverines are currently 3-1 to win the championship, coming off their huge win on Saturday against Ohio State. Luke, we'll start with you first. Are you staking or swapping Michigan?
I'm going to swap Michigan. I saw odds on them at plus 250. I will be selling a Michigan ticket at odds of plus 250. Even if assume they beat Purdue, they're in. if they whoever they play, let's say TCU for example's sake, like they'll be a favorite, but I wouldn't think by more than 4. Right? I think they'd be around a 4.5 point favorite in that football game. So not a gimme, not a cakewalk. TCU has been shattering the expectations the whole season. They've been outperforming expectations all season long. So why can't they do it again? But they'll be favored in that game. The amount of money I have in my bankroll, like I would bet it all on Georgia right now. I don't see a world where they just don't destroy both teams. Now they may have an off night, like in the semis, but I just can't see a universe where Georgia just doesn't destroy both teams on the way to another national championship. They've just looked so dominant all year long. So especially knowing Michigan's odds were high earlier in the season, like 40-1, 50-1 we've seen. So I can't justify not selling this team right now. Like I have to swap this team.
Yeah. It pains me to say this, but I would also swap Michigan with the caveat of like that you got them at long odds, right? You got them at 14-1 last week against Ohio State, or you got them at 60-1 preseason, because if there's a huge profit on the table for you right now, I think now is the time to pounce on them. The Michigan hype is never going to be higher than it is right now. I mean, they're a 17-point favorite against Purdue. Like they're supposed to be Purdue. If for some reason that they struggle, that's going to hurt their odds. I agree that if they do beat Purdue, they will be the 2 seed. They will avoid Georgia in that semifinal. But if they play Georgia in the final, we saw this last year, and Georgia killed them. They absolutely killed them in the Orange Bowl and in the semifinal. I think and it's just two different types of players. It's just two different types of teams. So if Michigan beats Purdue, if they win the semifinal, and then they play Georgia in the final, they're still going to be like a probably 2-1 underdog against.
Yeah, I'd say more. I honestly think they would be like plus 225, plus 250 in that game.
So the question is, what are you really gaining by holding it on for the next 2 games if you think they're going to play Georgia? So for those reasons, I would swap Michigan as well. And if you disagree with us, we have a fantastic Michigan ticket currently up for sale, collect amount of $3,400. And the seller's asking for $825. Those are odds of plus 312, which is better than every sports book in the country right now. As I mentioned, the best odds at sports books are plus 300, and this ticket is plus 312. So if you say, Ian and Luke, you guys are dumb, now's the time to get in on Michigan, then there is a ticket waiting for you on PropSwap. The next team we'll talk about, which we've touched on earlier, is Ohio State. As I mentioned, they were as high as 50-1 to win the championship after the Michigan game, and now down to 14-1 to win the championship. I will go first. Once again, it pains me to say that I will be staking Ohio State. This is purely based on the fact that I think USC or TCU is one of those two teams, if not both, are likely to lose. I think one of those two teams lose this week. USC only a 2.5 point favorite against Utah in the Pac-12 championship game being held in Las Vegas. TCU only a 2.5 point favorite against Kansas State in the Big 12 championship game in Arlington. That's a coin flip game, and I think one's going to land heads, one's going to land tails. And Ohio State sitting at number 5, I think would move into the 4-team playoff based on one of those two teams losing. My guess is if Ohio State did move into the playoff, you would see those odds drop to like 5-1, 6-1. I still think they would get a ton of respect from bookmakers. If they do make it, despite the game they had against Michigan. I realize if they make it as a 4 seed, that means they play Georgia, but I still think you can make money by betting Ohio State and just hoping that USC or Kansas State, one of those two teams, if not both, blow it, because we see this every year where teams are in these super high pressure situations, their entire season's on the line, and they just play really, really tight. which is different. TCU's been playing with house money all season long, kind of, and now it's like, oh my God, we're one game away from making the playoff, and they just kind of diverge from their game plan.
Yeah, I agree, man. I will also stake Ohio State with the prediction that one of those two teams will blow it, just because, to your point, like they've put so much energy into the season. Now it's like, well, TCU might be thinking like, well, like, why don't we just half-ass this game and we'll still get in? Let's save our energy for the CFP where it really counts. Like Kansas State comes in and knocks their teeth in and wins that game. Utah, I've kind of liked this team the whole season. Really good head coach, well-coached kids. They have nothing to lose. They could upset USC in Las Vegas this weekend. That's a Friday night game. That'll be fun. So yeah, I agree. It's, perhaps the strategy is you grab Ohio State future and then go make like small hedge bets on USC and TCU. You can even parlay it, right? Because if both those two teams have to win to knock you out, so maybe you just make a small parlay hedge on USC and TCU money line. So yeah, I agree with you. I think one of those two teams blows it. Ohio State gets back in like this. I can't stress enough how all of these committee members want the big teams in this thing. Like, this is all about money. It's all about ads. They're trying to sell ads during these 4 playoff games. They're trying to sell tickets. Like, they don't want TCU in this thing. This is not on computers. This is human beings making these decisions, and they want USC in there. They want Alabama in there. They want Ohio State in there. Those are going to sell the most tickets. Those will sell the most TV commercials during the game. So it's up to humans. This isn't going to be decided by gameplay alone.
Yeah, and I would almost say that they want USC and Ohio State over Alabama, just because I think there's a lot of Alabama fatigue. I'm not so sure that these fans would show up this year as they have in past years, just because they kind of know that this team is not as good as in previous years. So I totally agree. I think the ideal committee playoff would be Georgia, Michigan, USC, and Ohio State would be the ideal playoff. So we will see. Another week of exciting games. We got World Cup, we got college football, we got NFL. So strap in, because the next couple months are going to be extremely fun. So thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. Please make sure to subscribe, leave a rating, and we will talk to you next week.